episode of Sales Pipeline Radio. My name is Matt Heinz. Excited to be here with you on the first Thursday in June. Here in Seattle, it is really working hard to try to just be spring. We're not even worried about summer yet. We just want spring to come here in Seattle. So we're working on it. If you are watching this live, if you're participating live on LinkedIn or YouTube, thanks very much for joining us. If you're on LinkedIn, you can be part of the show if you're watching this live. We have a question for our guest today, a comment or opinion on our topic today of working the virtual room and virtual relationship building and interpersonal skills in a virtual environment. Would love to have you chime in, ask questions, make comments. If you're watching or listening to this on demand, thank you so much for subscribing and downloading. Every episode of Sales Pipeline Radio you can find available on demand at salespipelineradio.com. Each week we are featuring some of the best and brightest minds in B2B sales and marketing. Very excited today to have with us Betty Monroe. She is an engagement coach, a sales consultant with Connective Engagement. Betty, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me so much. And let's clarify, I am not the marriage type engagement coach. That's actually been a question asked.
So not marriage engagement, but I think connectivity amongst us in a more virtual world is, we are both doing this from versions of our home, and doing more online and interactive engagements like this versus time in person. I think that, that was a pivot for COVID, that in many cases that balance will continue. So we're all having to learn a different way of engaging with each other. So talk a little bit about, how that came to you, how that's something that you're so passionate about and sort of where your focus is there.
Well, to be as brief as I can, after 23 years as an elementary school educator, an early childhood professional, an actress, and a teacher of children in the arts, it served as a really great background for me to see and understand how people connect and understand not only each other, but themselves. And over the last few years, having been a podcast producer and marketing manager for a sales-based podcast, I really watched B2B sellers and other professionals struggling with this environment. I happen to be a working film and TV actress as well. And I started kind of wheels spinning, thinking, my gosh, I was seeing people like this on camera, which was certainly not helpful to anybody, right? And I'm sure many of us could raise our hands and say, yeah, I've seen that or worse. And I really started thinking, my gosh, I would love to help people with not only the aesthetics of the virtual and now hybrid space, but the interpersonal skills that seem to have been lost or muted, not just due to the pandemic, but due to too much of this, right? So that's kind of how I wound up where I'm at.
Well, it's fascinating background. I think your experience as an actress, I think, certainly sort of provides some skills and experience to this. And, to a certain extent, how much of when we're interacting with people in a business environment, how much of that is or should be acting versus how much do we need to be natural? And sort of how does people think about the kind of proactively, the kind of presence or persona they want to have in front of others from a business perspective?
I'm so glad you asked that, Matt. You shouldn't be acting at all. Even as actors, we don't want to be acting. We want to be human beings being human, right? We're being versions of ourselves as the characters we play as another human, right? Or something that should be portrayed as human. So as sellers and actors, we have a lot in common in that we base almost everything we do on the relationships that we build and the trust that we create within building those relationships. And the space that we do that in has changed, right? So people are struggling, and the biggest complaint that I hear from sellers and other professionals, even attorneys and doctors, is, gosh, how on earth do I connect to a person in a box next to me on a screen as opposed to having them sitting across from me at a table, right? So yeah, I don't want you guys to be acting at all. And it's about being your most authentic self and the ability to build that genuine relationship.
And it's harder virtually just because of the environment we're in. I literally, as we record this session, I'm looking at you, but you don't think I'm looking at you because I should be looking up there. Even just watching a sporting event last night, like watching an interview from some people that were they were supposed to stare at cameras. And I think they were literally sitting 10 feet away from each other, but they were looking like they were looking at each other. That is unnatural to do. So how do you train yourself, or how do you get comfortable being your authentic self and being natural while still looking like you're paying attention and engaged in the conversation?
I think it is just some getting used to, right? And it's everybody, change is difficult to not resist, correct? So, I'm looking directly at you right now, But if I look at the camera, to me, that feels unnatural. I want to
Yeah.
look at you. And I
Yeah.
think that once everybody gets used to the fact that, yeah, we may not be appearing to look directly at each other, I am looking directly at you at this moment.
Mhm.
So it's simply about pretending that that's not there, the barrier is not there. And I'm just looking at you, listening to you, watching your body language, and listening to you, most importantly. I think people are so wrapped up in the needing everything to be perfect,
Mhm.
and it's really not necessary. Nothing is perfect. And a perfect example I like to share is, I'm sure there are multiple people who've had a toddler run screaming naked behind them right on camera while they're in the middle of a Zoom meeting with, their CEO or higher ups or goodness knows, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny, but it's real life. And I
Mhm.
think once we come to accept that nothing is perfect, especially given the state of our world at this time, I think we're all going to be okay if we let go of that need for perfection, because it's not going to happen.
Speaking today on Sales Pipeline Radio with Betty Monroe, she spends a lot of time helping sales and marketing teams just increase connection, increase genuine interactions, to sort of just help with business discourse today. And I really like your perspective on sort of having to look at the camera versus looking at you. And honestly, I think given that we look at ourselves and look at screens all day long, there must be some science behind the fact that, like, if I can look at you but you're not looking directly at me, it's less intense and therefore it's a little more natural, and I think it makes it so that you're more focused on the conversation you want to have. Is there anything behind that?
I actually don't know the answer to that.
Mhm.
However, my guess would be this. I think you're right in the sense that for you that works, and for me, maybe so. Every individual is different,
Yeah.
and the comfort level of everyone is going to be at a different space. So I'm comfortable either way because that's my personality. But yes, a lot of people who are utilizing this virtual space now that are the most uncomfortable are perhaps IT professionals or people that are more introversive and aren't as used to being social or type A or the leader in the physical space, right? So for those people, it may be more comfortable to not have to look directly into somebody's eyes across the table. Make sense?
It does. It does for sure. I mean, let's take that another level. I think, the white space around business meetings is different now than it used to be. Like if you're in an office with your colleagues, like there was the time before meetings and after meetings. There was the waiting outside the conference room door when someone else's meeting was happening. If you're doing a sales call, there was the right up the elevator before and after the meeting, right? Where you had that sort of natural opportunity for small talk. Zoom doesn't naturally have that. And so how do you how do you really sort of rebuild rapport building and so create opportunities to sort of naturally authentically connect with people when the space, the time, and in some cases the senses are limited in this kind of a capacity?
Well, that's definitely a multifaceted question, but I think easily answered in several stages. So, the first part, getting back that water cooler time or the white space you're referring to, is easier than you think. Now we're used to this, right? So, we know we're scheduling these meetings. And you need to let everybody know the first 5 minutes is going to be dedicated to just chatting and not just how's the weather. Let's get back to actually connecting to each other. Start your meetings with asking your meeting participants, hey, tell me one sweet thing and one sour thing that's going on in your world right now. It can be regarding work or personal life, whatever you're comfortable sharing and showing your level of vulnerability. And that's another thing. And we can circle to having the sense of empathy and vulnerability, both in roles of leadership and as colleagues, is so integral. That's been lost. And I think people got so tied up in all the craziness going on in the world or that need to be perfect and how do we
Mhm.
switch from in person to this virtual space and I don't like it, and we need to let it all go and just be human beings being human. I can't repeat that enough times. That's one of my favorite things to say because people have forgotten how to do that,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, I think that, because we have these narrower connections in a virtual format, I think because people then don't naturally have, in some cases, sort of the professional backdrop they used to be. Yeah, like, I used to do most events like this, from my office, right? Where there's a much better background than if you're watching this and seeing the hot mess behind me in the basement here. But you know what? We all have our hot mess. We all have sort of the natural lives that we live, and I think if that's who you are, not that everyone is a hot mess, but just like we're all human as we go through this professionally and personally, and being willing to sort of mix the human with the professional, it feels like there is a place for that deep in business, in sales, in management. What would you say to someone who is still just sort of anxious about how that makes them appear? Whether it's someone who is trying in an interview, trying to get a job, or early in their career, trying to impress sort of a management team. Like there's a lot of anxiety I see from people that don't have some of those natural sort of appearances, so to speak, that are doing the best they can from where they are. How do you help them sort of ease into being human?
I think just reminding them that they're not alone, reminding them that they're not the only one in that situation. You claim your background's a hot mess. It's actually not. I see two pieces of neat furniture with things neatly arranged on top, and that's okay. Personally, when I'm working with someone on the virtual aesthetics of their meeting space, whether it's in an office or at home, I'm not a fan, and again, this is my personal opinion, everyone has one. I'm not a fan of the virtual backgrounds, and I'll tell you why. And there's nothing wrong with them, but I want you to be the main focus of what I'm looking at. And right now you are. Just because you have furniture behind you doesn't take away from you, because you're lit properly. You're elevated to a proper level where I can actually see as much of Matt as I need to see to communicate with you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I think people need to get off of worrying about that need for perfection. Yes, you don't want to show up with a hoarder's basement behind you, but you definitely want to make sure that everybody, first of all, everyone understands that they're not alone in this.
Yeah.
Everyone's going to have a different space to work in. If you live in a 2-bedroom apartment in the middle of Manhattan and you no longer have an office to go to, you don't really have much choice, right? So I think it's okay to be okay with being imperfect.
Well, I'll take a step further. I agree with you on the background piece. And, we do some recurring events where we have sort of a common background that becomes kind of a branded thing. But sometimes if people show up with what is clearly a sort of a fake background, I'm always wondering, what are they hiding? So I get distracted by looking at that. No, I'm not focused. I'm distracted because I'm like, that clearly is fake. Like, what are they hiding? Is there a difference to if you are a manager and you are trying to help someone be comfortable and authentic? How do I, as a manager, help who I'm talking to feel comfortable and not as anxious or self-conscious of what's behind them or how they're showing up virtually?
I love that you asked that. One of the things I really like talking to organization leaders and managers about is, the fact that you can't meet these prospects or potential, talent that you're thinking of adding to your teams the way you used to when we are meeting them virtually. And one of the pros that this environment has created is that it enables you to expand your ability to reach for those people, right? So it's okay for you to, in say an email prior to meeting them, when you're setting up the time to meet with them, share a fun or unique fact about yourself at the end of that email. Share something that maybe not a lot of people know that you're comfortable sharing, that is totally appropriate, but yet shows that you have a sense of vulnerability and empathy. And it's going to break that ice just enough for them to hopefully respond with the same. Ask them to share one about themselves too. Show that human side of you. There's a huge difference between a leader and a boss, and that comes everywhere. And one of the things I really pride myself in when I'm imparting coaching skills to my clients is that we have to remember that those soft skills that used to be not so important in the corporate environment are actually more so because of exactly what you just said. So recognizing that it's okay to be a human being being human again, and to show some level of not only vulnerability in yourself, but empathy towards others is going to really soften that blow and hopefully make them relax.
Well, I think there are a lot of tangible ways you can do that, right? I mean, if you have a meeting for a half hour, like plan an agenda for like 20-25 minutes and plan on not giving people a couple minutes back, but saying like, hey, at the end of the meeting, like, hey, I'm curious, like, what's with the UW helmet above there? Is that where you went to school? Is that your favorite team? I noticed the cross net behind you. Like, so, when it used to be you could do a sales call and look at people's four walls and say what's on the wall is things they care about. In today's environment, there's going to be something there you could talk about. I've got in our leadership team meeting every week, we start our meetings with segues. And so we go around the room and someone just says something they're excited about professionally or personally. And so we get to know each other and what we do it Tuesday afternoon. So a lot of times what was on the weekend is still people top of mind. And so it's a great way of sort of building connection with people. And I think the stronger connections we have with those on our teams, with our peers, with our direct reports, with our prospects, those connections are really what makes us human. And I think that it's not something we just sort of stuff to the edges I think it benefits us when we make that part of the agenda.
I totally agree. And taking it back to what I said about allowing that even the first few minutes rather than the last few minutes, about saying to them, tell me something sweet or sour about your life. And the sour isn't to indicate something negative, but simply, what are you comfortable sharing? Or is there something that you need to get off your chest that will help you breathe, right, through this next step, whatever it is?
I love it. Well, Betty Monroe, thank you so much for your time today. If people want to learn more about you or more about the work you do, where's the best place for them to go and check out?
The best place for them to go is they could just visit my website, connectiveengagement.com. And I also have an Instagram the same.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. This has been another episode of Sales Pipeline Radio. We'll see you next week. This is Matt Heinz. Have a good rest of your week. Take care.